Hi everyone, I'm Paul, and this is tip 4 in the speech quality course. Watch out for similar sounds. Before we start, do you remember what phonemes are? We talked about them in tip 2. Phonemes are the smallest units of sound in a language. They tell us the pronunciation or the correct pronunciation of words in English. I want you to look at this situation. Imagine you just finished work and your coworker, who you don't know very well, walks up to you and says, "Let's take a bath together." How do you feel? A little bit strange, right? A little bit awkward. But actually, what your coworker wanted to say is, "Let's take a bus together." So as you can see here, just a small change in one phoneme sound can create a big change in the meaning of a sentence. So we have to be careful with similar sounding phonemes. Mistaking similar sounding phonemes can completely change the meaning of a sentence, just like we looked at before. To know the difference between similar sounding phonemes, it's important to know the mechanical differences. So if you remember from our other tip, tip 2, we talked about how sometimes we need to look at the specific mechanical ways sounds are made. For example, the position of the teeth, the position of the lips or the tongue, the vocal cords, whether they're voiced or unvoiced, even how the air is moving within the mouth. Now, there are some sounds that learners often mistake in English, which are very similar. I want to look at two sets of examples today and just how we can tell the difference between the sounds by looking at the mechanics of how they're made. Let's look at these two phonemes. Can you read them? This phoneme is r. This phoneme is l. So what are the key differences between the two sounds? Excuse me. Well, they are both liquid sounds, which means they're both made by moving the tongue into different positions in the mouth, and they're both voiced. The key difference is with this phoneme, the tongue moves to the back of the mouth and curls up. It doesn't touch the top of the mouth. This is important. And the lips make a round shape, like this. With this phoneme, what happens is that the tongue moves forward and up and briefly touches the top of the mouth, just above the top teeth there. And then it comes down. It sounds like this. Le. Le. Let's look at an example of how they're used in words. So with this phoneme, we say rice. But with this phoneme, we say lice. I'm sure you know what rice is. It's this thing we eat. Do you know what lice is? Lice is this nasty little bug. So as you can imagine, it could be quite strange if at dinner time someone says to you, "Would you like some lice?" instead of "Would you like some rice?" Let's look at some other ways the words change with the phonemes. Correct and collect. Fright and flight. Let's look at one other set of similar sounding phonemes. Here we have the phoneme, and here we have the S phoneme. Excuse me. Now these two phonemes are both unvoiced fricatives. So they're both made by creating this small gap in the mouth for air to flow through. They're not voiced. Neither of them are voiced. The sound is made from the air flowing through this small gap. So how are they different? Well, firstly, with this phoneme, what happens is that the tongue moves to close this gap between the top teeth and bottom teeth. And then we try to push air through this tiny gap, and the air kind of, just a little air comes between the top teeth and the tongue and the bottom teeth in the tongue. So it sounds like this. Be careful. It's important that you close your gap between your teeth with your tongue, but be careful not to stick your tongue out too much, like this. Then it will be difficult to make the next phoneme in the word, and you'll also look pretty silly. Now this phoneme, the difference is, what happens is that the tongue moves up here and creates this very small gap between the tongue and the top of the mouth, and then the air is pushed through that gap here. So it sounds like this. As you can see with this sound, there's much more air coming through compared to the sound. There's little air coming through. Let's look at some words that use these phonemes that are similar. Bath, bus. Think, sink. Growth, gross. Here are some other common mistakes that I've found that learners make with similar sounding phonemes. Here's the or and for example, walk and work. S and sh, for example, see and she. V and b, for example, excuse me, vote and boat. A and a, for example, travel and trouble. Do you know what tongue twisters are? There are these sentences that we can use to practice similar sounds. They can be kind of fun if we try to say them fast. Let's try some. How about the difference between th and s? A thief said thank you 63 times. L and r. Roger Rabbit really likes white rice. S and sh. She sells seashells by the seashore. Am I getting them right so far? I think I am. V and b. Beverly loves very big bags and vans. Sometimes you can even make your own tongue twisters for similar sounds that you want to practice. So what are the key points for similar sounds today? It's important for you to know the differences of similar sounds or similar phonemes in English. They can sometimes cause miscommunications, and sometimes they can be even embarrassing. It's especially important to know when they're used in words that you use often. For example, travel and trouble. When studying pronunciation of phonemes and words, don't worry if you can't improve your pronunciation right away. It can take time to improve. It's best to practice pronunciation for short times, but to do it often. Think of pronunciation practice as going to a sports gym. Sometimes you're training your mouth gradually to make these new sounds. Try some practice at home. I want you to try and test your pronunciation of similar words using your smartphone. So choose two similar words, and say them into your smartphone, and see if your smartphone can make the note in the same order that you said them. For example, hey Siri, make a note, correct and collect.
What do you want it to say?
That's my Siri actually answering me now. And then check your note on your smartphone screen, and let's see if the words are in the same order that you said them in. It's funny that my Siri is actually answering me now. Next week, we're going to talk about pauses and how they are very important in helping listeners process your speech, especially in longer speech and presentations. For more tips on language learning and teaching, check out my website at pomaka.com. On my website, you can also find information on online Zoom courses I will be holding on Sundays from April this year. See you next week.